So today we're looking at Dhammapada verse 314, which reads, Akatang dukkatang seyo pachad tapati dukkatang katancha sugatang seyo yang katva nanu tapati, which means not doing an evil deed is better. Afterwards, one burns from an evil deed. Doing a good deed is better, which, having done, one doesn't burn as a result. This verse was taught following the events regarding three people: a woman, her husband, and their indentured servant, female servant. When the Buddha was dwelling in Jetavana near Savatthi, in Savatthi there was a certain woman whose husband was unsatisfied with his wife. Being satisfied with your partner is a big deal in Buddhism. It's considered one of the brahmacharya, the ways of living a spiritual life. You don't have to necessarily become a monk to live a spiritual life. Living in contentment with your partner without letting lust burn you, consume you with its fire, is a spiritual practice. This man was unable to contain his lust, and so had relations with their female servant. Now the woman found out, the wife found out, got very angry, irrationally angry. Irrationally in the sense that it's understandable that she should be angry, even though anger is never really rational. She became unrational in that rather than taking it out on her husband, she grabbed the servant. When she found out that this had been going on, she seized hold of her, tied her arms and legs, and according to the text, cut off her nose and ears. Which, when I read this, I thought there's no way that actually happened. Some of the Dhammapada verses seem a little bit embellished, especially when you have other versions of the stories elsewhere that are less extravagant. However, this was apparently a real thing in ancient India. It's in the ancient texts, Hindu texts, not Buddhist texts, that there was some movement towards this being a punishment for adultery. And this is actually a thing that happened, cutting off someone's nose if they committed adultery. Obviously, somewhat misplaced, considering the real culprit is the person of power, the husband. But so not to, of course, excuse the horrible acts, but to perhaps excuse the Dhammapada for the craziness of the event, that it may very well have happened. Acted horribly towards this woman, and threw her in a room, locked the door, and to hide the fact that she had done such a terrible thing, went to her husband and said, "Come, husband, let's go to the monastery, to Jetavana, and listen to the Dhamma." Her husband agreed, and they went to see the Buddha, and while they were sitting there in the middle of the Buddha's, the crowd of listeners in the monastery of Jetavana, some relatives of, I guess, of the servant came to the house where they lived, and hearing the noise of this woman struggling or suffering in the closed room, freed her. And having learned what had transpired from this woman, took her to the monastery, and standing in front of the assembled crowd, proclaimed the guilt of both the wife for such an obviously terrible deed, but also of the husband for taking advantage of his power over the servant to force her into that sort of relationship. And most assuredly there was a lot of anger, everyone becoming quite upset at the fact that this sort of thing could happen, especially with people who would then pretend to be devout followers of the Buddha's teaching. But the Buddha's response was quite inspiring. He didn't attack the couple, certainly didn't get upset. He said something, he pointed to the Dhamma, to the truth. And he said basically what this verse says. One might think that you can do an evil deed without anyone finding out. But it doesn't matter really, ultimately, whether any specific person finds out about your evil deeds. Regardless of whether anyone finds out, you burn nonetheless. Having done an evil deed, you burn. And then he taught this verse. So, two things stand out from the story. The first is how incredible it is that evil can be performed and hidden by seemingly ordinary, virtuous people. There's a saying called, a term called the banality of evil. How the majority of evil is not carried out by people who are presenting themselves as monsters. People who are constantly in states of rage and cruelty. It's most often performed by people who appear to be virtuous, who appear to be ordinary. So the first lesson is that people are complex, but the real Buddhist lesson is that people don't exist at all. People are concepts, constructs that we give rise to, and they're often misguided. Our idea of who someone is based on how they present themselves. The value of Buddhist practice, mindfulness practice in particular, is that it allows us to see more deeply the nature of reality behind concepts, behind the concept of a person who we might build up to be some virtuous pillar of society, some great person, even a holy person, even a Buddhist monk, or a religious teacher. Many religious teachers in the time of the Buddha were guilty of great corruption and evil. And so our first lesson is to focus not so much on individuals and to be able to see through the illusion of concepts, because so much of our interpersonal stress and conflict comes from expectations based on concepts. You expect people to be a certain way based on the idea you've built up about who they are, who your partner is, who your spouse is, who your children are, who your parents are. And when they change, it can lead to stress. It can lead to great suffering. It can lead to rage. You're unprepared for uncertainty. You're unprepared for surprises. You're unprepared for things that go opposite, contrary to your expectations. And so you're unprepared for evil. You're also unprepared for good. If we vilify someone, we will miss when they try to change. We will miss the potential to help them change. The second lesson from the verse relates to how the Buddha handled the conflict. I mean, this is the way the Buddha would handle challenges and difficulties and conflicts. The way he addressed evil, by focusing on the Dhamma. He would very rarely chastise directly, denounce directly anyone's evil, denouncing the person. Instead, he tried always to look at the Dhamma, and he reminds us that our focus should be on the Dhamma, and that there's great power in focusing on the truth. Rather than condemning someone, often we condemn people without evidence, and so we stray into the realm of uncertainty of concepts when we denounce someone because of allegations. And they may be true, they may be false, but the fact that we can be misled reminds us of how this is not the truth of the reality of the situation. The reality is always going to be experiences. And most important are going to be our experiences. How do we react? Do we go along with evil? Or do we denounce the evil, reminding ourselves and others that evil is something that leads to burning, leads to torture. Leads to torture for the one who commits the evil, not just for the one who is a victim. So the Buddha's focus on truth is something that we can take as an example and remind ourselves that our focus should always be not on holding grudges or making sure that perpetrators pay, are punished for their bad deeds, but focus on reality and to remind ourselves that as we are enraged and upset about the evil in the world, we're burning ourselves. We ourselves are engaged in evil. To always be well grounded in reality, that principles are useless if they don't carry us to peace, happiness, and freedom from suffering, and if they don't maintain our own purity of mind, our own clarity, our own goodness of mind. Getting angry or upset about injustices is an injustice in itself. So talking about the Dhamma, this is one of the verses more likely to be glazed over, to be passed by, skimmed over, thinking it's a simple teaching. But I could say two things about the main lesson, the main teaching behind the verse. The first is that it encapsulates the simple truth of Buddhism, that there are no extenuating circumstances for evil or for good. Evil is evil, and it will always be better not to perform an evil deed. Likewise, it will always be better when the choice presents itself to do a good deed. And these make really good mottos, mantras, if you will. Akatang dukatang seyo. Not doing an evil deed is always better. Katan cha sukatang seyo. And it's always better to do a good deed. It's a great reminder. It's a great way to start on the Buddhist path, to focus on this truth, because it counters intellectualism, sophistry. It eschews all of that in favor of direct observation. It claims that goodness and evil are things that can be known as true without any extenuating circumstances, without any complexity. A good deed is always good. A bad deed is always bad. The second thing is that this isn't simply an intellectual teaching. It is useful as a reminder, as a way of navigating and directing yourself towards the Buddha's teaching. When you understand that the Buddha taught this, this is a great way to help you understand what is Buddhism, what is not Buddhism. Buddhism will never tell you it's okay sometimes to do an evil deed, and it's okay sometimes, or sometimes you're better off not doing a good deed. No. But on a deeper level, this is a challenge. The Buddha is proclaiming something that no one else, apart from an enlightened being, could ever proclaim. Anyone can agree and say, yeah, better to do good deeds, better to not do evil deeds. What's so special about that? But only a person who truly knows these things can actually be free from the commission of evil deeds and be guaranteed to always always do the right thing, always perform a good deed. Someone might say, I know that bad deeds or evil deeds are evil, getting angry, greedy, deluded, hurting others. I know these things are bad, but I still do them. And this is the key to Buddhism, is that if you still perform evil deeds, you don't actually know that they are evil. That truly knowing and understanding the nature of evil as evil, the nature of good as good, is sufficient. Is sufficient to prevent you entirely from ever performing an evil deed. This is why the focus is on seeing clearly in Buddhism. And the reason is because they burn. Because evil deeds burn, and good deeds have the opposite effect. They cool the burning mind, they cool the fever of greed and anger and delusion. So it's a challenge, and it's a call to investigation. We have this bold claim that evil deeds are inherently evil. It's not something you have to intellectualize or calculate the consequences to decide whether something is good or evil. Simple observation is enough, and eventually leads you to this unshakable truth that it is better to not do an evil deed, and it is better to do a good deed. To know these things, it sounds simple, but the teaching itself sounds, as I said, simplistic even. But it's such a profound and difficult thing to actually know for yourself. A person who truly knows these things, again, will never perform an evil deed, will always perform good deeds when they have the opportunity, because they know, because they have seen for themselves. And so this is an aspect of how mindfulness takes place. It's like when you do walking meditation, we tell you to say stepping right, stepping left, and it sounds foolish, because we know these things. I know I'm stepping right, why would I have to say it? When the stomach rises, I know the stomach is rising. What use is it to say it to myself? And again, it's related to this actually knowing. What we're trying to cultivate is an actual knowledge, a direct knowledge, an awareness of things as they are. So when you do say to yourself, rising, falling, when you do say to yourself, stepping right, stepping left, you start to know and see these things in a way that isn't possible intellectually. It isn't possible even by a cursory observation. You know them deeply. And more importantly, you understand the mind more deeply. You start to understand this mind that is derisive towards the practice. A meditator who is skeptical and might be internally ridiculing this silly practice of repeating to yourself what you're doing, you start to see the nature of that mind as evil, because it's a disliking mind, it's a critical mind, it's a judging mind. It's not an objective mind, it's not a pure mind, it's not a clear mind. As an example, and of course you feel the boredom of having to do repetitive practice. You feel attachment and the desire to do something else, or you feel attachment to the practice. When the practice is peaceful and calm, you feel attachment to that. You feel all these things. And you start to notice the burning. So talking about the burning part of this verse, many of the translations don't translate it as burning. It's probably not how it would be understood colloquially. I'm not really sure. It's so far removed now, 2,500 years later, and I'm not an expert in Pali. But the root is tap. This is the root of this verb that's being used, which means to burn or to get hot. It's where the word tapas comes from, where these ascetics who burnt themselves. They tortured themselves to burn up the defilements, to burn up their karma, actually, not really defilements, but feeling like they had all this bad karma, so they would burn it up through their austerities. And so it's used in different ways. It's used to talk about effort. Effort is a burning. The Buddha used atapi. He talked about patience as being the greatest form of exertion, the greatest form of torture, the greatest sort of burning. If you want to talk about burning up bad things, patience is that which burns them up, truly. That's the Buddhist austerity. But it's also used in this way, and it's often translated because the verb came to mean something like regret. You will regret it. But it's insightful to remember that the word for regret is actually to burn, because the regret it really feels like you're burning up. And in fact, there's more to just feeling regret. There are 4 kinds of burning, 4 ways that it can burn. The first is called attanowada, meaning your own regret, your own self-hatred, and your own criticism of yourself. Having done an evil deed, you can't help but feel bad about yourself. It's easy to convince yourself or to delude yourself into thinking that it's okay to do evil deeds, but impossible at the deepest level to believe that an evil deed is a bad deed, is a good deed. It makes it impossible for a person who is committed to evil deeds to actually practice mindfulness. It makes it impossible. Without giving up their perception of evil deeds as good, they can't possibly see the truth. It's an absolute counter to seeing clearly. If you've ever encountered people who try to meditate with too much mental pollution, it's just near impossible for them, without having done anything good to support them, support their minds. The dedication to evil is debilitating from a mindfulness perspective. The second is parasowada, the blame that comes from others. So of course evil burns up relationships, it burns up friendships, it burns up your reputation. The simplest of evil deeds, sometimes it doesn't even take an evil deed. Even the perception of evil deeds can destroy a person's reputation. Even when you haven't done evil deeds, you can lose reputation. But certainly when someone is truly guilty of evil, you're constantly in danger of this burning. The third is danda, means punishment. So when you do things like cut off someone's nose and ears, or even when you commit adultery in certain societies, there's punishment. Sometimes it means disadvantage in divorce. In ancient India, I think in some places it actually meant a crime to commit adultery. In certain countries it does anyway. But not limiting ourselves to adultery. There are many evil deeds that are considered crimes and are punished. And of course there's many different kinds of punishment, but actual punishment, danda, the stick, you get the stick. And the fourth, of course, is a different kind of burning. It's called niraya, I guess is the Pali. Niraya means hell. So obviously as a result of hell, from a Buddhist perspective, one can expect to be reborn in a state of loss. Hell is a certain possibility certainly a possibility for those who are committed to evil deeds. It's not sure that such a person could ever hope to be reborn as a human, let alone as an animal, let alone a human. Quite common for people who are dedicated to evil to be reborn in a place of great torture and suffering. But ultimately, the deepest form of torture is the burning that goes on in the mind, how it consumes you, makes it impossible to be mindful, and really impossible to find peace. The Buddha reminded us that a person who is dedicated to evil, who performs evil, and who has no capacity to perform good, is never engaged in good deeds, they burn all day and all night. They toss and they turn at night, unable to sleep, their minds being consumed by the fever. And this is something that can only really clearly be seen through the practice of mindfulness. It's really the essence, or one way of describing the essence of mindfulness. It helps you see the fever. It helps you see that greed is a fever, anger is a fever, delusion is a fever, worry and fear and all of these negative emotions. They consume you. They burn up the mind. They keep the mind from being at peace. Keep the mind from seeing clearly. Keep the mind from letting go. They keep the mind reacting again and again, just as this woman reacted so violently to her husband's reaction to his own lust. So from a meditative perspective, I think there are mainly two lessons we can take away. The first is a reminder to focus on truth rather than focusing on beings. To not get caught up in the specifics of events that have occurred, people that have done terrible things to you or to others. To not get hung up on concepts. To focus on reality. Focus on your own reality. How do you respond? Do you respond by supporting good, performing good, helping those people who are victims, and even helping those people who are perpetrators? By denouncing the evil and by encouraging rehabilitation and so on. But as meditators, to focus on, to appreciate the importance of learning how to see reality moment by moment by moment as a useful tool to help us live in society even, because of how it purifies our interaction with the world around us, helping us respond to evil with good, to good with more good, to suffering with good, to always respond with clarity and purity and goodness in our hearts, because we see the burning that comes from evil. The second lesson is to strive to become someone who sees the truth clearly, and as a reminder that it is enough to know the truth of good and evil. That through the cultivation of mindfulness, you're able to see the difference. And there is no other way to be able to proclaim with such certainty that it's always better to do a good deed and always better to not do an evil deed. There's no other way for absolute certainty than to see things clearly, to see experience and reality clearly as it is, to be able to see for yourself the fever and the fire that accompanies evil, always and unfailingly. So that's the Dhamma for today. A simple teaching, but a valuable one for us to remember. It's so simple that it can easily become a core part of our outlook. Just simply remembering. Whenever you think to do an evil deed, remember, it's better not to. Remind yourself and challenge yourself to see more clearly so that you can see for yourself it's better not to. And free yourself from the consequences of doing those evil deeds. And when the opportunity arises to do good deeds, you can remind yourself it's always better to do it. Just do it. You won't regret it. So, thank you all for listening. That's the Dhamma for today.